Presenting today we have Stephanie Kowal, our SCM Practice Manager. Yay. This is her third today, 2 more to go. Going for a record here. And we have Dan Farruggio, one of RPI's top consultants last year and a veritable expert on MSCM. So very excited to see this. Hope you enjoy it. Stephanie and Dan.
All right, so a little bit about RPI. We were founded in 1999 in Baltimore, Maryland. Currently, right now, we have right around 60 plus consultants nationwide, and our certifications run the gamut of all Lawson and Infor practices. And we're a fun team that enjoys doing presentations, and apparently we like taking team pictures. So today we're going to talk a little bit about your PAR setup in Lawson, how to manage your PAR levels, and the integration with mobile supply chain management. And then on top of that, some of the reporting functionalities, some custom reports, and then lastly, we'll finish up with some best practices.
So let's get right into it. So first, you really need to set up those PARs, right? So you're starting off in IC81. And something to note is that it automatically creates a IC12 record, which is a little bit interesting, but that's where that information is written to. It also auto-creates the RQ01 record, the rec location, as well as the ICO2, the IC location. So really building into your practices that either you build some sort of smart notification, to alert the right users to update the remaining records, right? Because RQ01's created, it's not going to automatically default the account unit, then you'll get some failure notifications when you're trying to submit a PAR. So having some sort of process around that is really helpful. And then having some ongoing monitoring and maintenance reports is really, really important. So they're your end users, your customers that are out there creating these PARs, adding sources. It may not be the vendor that you're choosing to order from, right? So they could have fat-fingered, put it in a wrong vendor code, or are choosing to order it from a different vendor that's your prime vendor. So having some sort of maintenance there to look after who you have as the priority one agreement vendor and who they've selected on the PAR replenishment. That's the idea for a report. Also looking over your unit of measure string, making sure the right one's selected there. And then there can be some issues in MSCM, which we'll get into in a little bit. If there is an error for one of the items on your PAR count, it actually creates a requisition, but it's unreleased in RQ10. So you need some level of management there to either alert the requester so they go into RQ10 and release it and then work on their error separately, or get creative and build a IPA flow that, when this error occurs, automatically go into RQ10, auto-release it, and notify the requester that they need to work on that other issue. And then just a heads up that there can be errors that you'll experience because a PO25 agreement is unreleased. So sometimes the system doesn't know where to grab that appropriate price from. So here's just an example of PAR carts with incorrect vendor codes, so someone can go in and maintain and correct those. And then most importantly, managing your PAR levels. So it's a lot of information. It can be difficult to just get your hands around it. So I really like to utilize ICO3 report groups. So if you're a department that has 10 different requesting locations and you're trying to report on all of them and not run all these reports individually, you can really leverage ICO3 for that. So Lawson offers some canned reports that can be beneficial, but typically you're pulling in information from other reports to bring them all together, right? So here we've provided some Lawson canned reports, and also are just mentioning there's some direct tables here that you can pull information from and build your own reports off of them. So taking some time to invest in building some custom reports using something like Crystal, where you can have it out on your LBI dashboard. Here's an example of par usage report. So here it's letting the user know whether or not they need to up or down their par, or if everything's good, they don't need to make any changes there. And then here's one that's a little bit more intense that does a similar thing, but it's also taking into account what they actually ordered via handheld and what was done on a manual requisition using RQC or RQ10. So that's a pretty cool idea. And then lastly, typically whoever's maintaining these pars is not maintaining the item information, right? Your MMIS team is making description changes, manufacturer code changes, and that always doesn't end up getting notified to those end users, right? And they have labels to take into account, printed out downtime reports that they may need to update. So here's a Crystal report that we created that looks at whether or not there were any description changes, par level changes, manufacturer information changes, and lets them know whether or not they need to update the label. Also, if the par location has added a new item to their par or removed one, it will let them know, hey, add a label or remove the label from the area. So this is something that could be run at the end of each week and just kind of maintained from there.
All right, so now we're going to start talking a little bit more about the MSCM configuration and what that entails. So the first thing that I recommend is always getting a copy of your MSCM.filter.properties file. That's really the keys to running mobile supply chain management. It has all of your scheduler values, how often MSCM is sending information to Lawson, and how frequently Lawson is sending that information back. In that same file, there is a Lawson security group that is defined, and that is required for all users that are mobile supply chain users. And they need to be assigned that group in Lawson security, so you could add them to the mobile supply chain portal. And once they're in the portal, then you can start setting them up with mobile supply chain groups, different function access, and all that fun stuff. There's two levels of administration really. You have the IT information, or the administration level, and they're really responsible for setting up that filtered properties file and making sure everything is running smoothly. They help with printer setups a little bit. And then you have your super user or your materials management super user. And typically their responsibilities are updating and maintaining users, locations, labels. So you have those two separate distinct levels of administration and who does what. So your MSCM location access is also independent of your RQO4 access. So within the user setup of mobile supply chain, you have to go in and specifically grant access to each user. So if you click that radio button on the user setup that says location access, you define if they have locations for all locations for a company, specific locations within that company, or if you check global access, that'll give a user all access to all locations and companies, including future additional locations that are eventually added to mobile supply chain. And then some newer functionality that it's existed, but they have made some updates to it. You have the max additional order quantity, so you could set up how many times par you allow a user to order. And that's actually an MSCM rule that you assign to a group, so you could remove or add that functionality based on mobile supply chain groups, and that's just adding the additional quantity to this field down below. And then there's also the quantity on order that's in the par configuration screen. You're able to add or see how much of that item is on order. But for that to work, it needs to be a vendor replenished item. So on IC81.2, those items need to be set up to be replenished from a vendor. Otherwise, you'll see the NA next to it, meaning it's being replenished from your warehouse. There's also some functionality where you could update the par levels from the handheld, and that's relatively new. So if you have that functionality enabled, you can click that little pencil and update the par level, and that will actually update your IC81 record in the par levels. And then there's also, you can flip the flag to show the average par utilization or suggested par level, and that will start updating over time as you order more items. And then the last piece, it's not really a configuration as much as it is an option with the My Par forms. And that's really helpful for organizations that have a ton of pars, and each user or par tech is counting a subset of those pars on a daily basis. So when you log in to count your par forms, those show up right away on the handheld, and you don't have to go through and click all par forms and select, scroll through hundreds of locations to select. They're already right there grouped for you, and you still have the ability to go back and select additional par forms if you're covering for somebody else. Okay, so labels are always a good conversation to have around mobile supply chain. And there's a lot of different options you could that are available for you with labels. It's not always a one-size-fits-all scenario for your departments or organizations. One department might require certain information, while another doesn't really want to show all the different various options available for those labels. That first label up top is an out-of-the-box mobile supply chain label. And they do give you the ability to loosely customize that label, so you can change around the fields itself on the label. You can't really change what is showing, just the order of the fields in which they show up. The second one down is a custom label created with Crystal Reports. And so you need Crystal Reports and BI or an LBI server. And we just learned that when you're creating these labels, that font, so they use the barcode font is either code 3 of 9 or 128A, and that barcode font needs to be loaded onto the actual BI or LBI server, and that would work if your developer is remoting into the server to develop the report, or if they were using it locally on their own computer, they would have to have that font installed on their own computer as well. So there's some really good customizations you could do with Crystal Reports in terms of labels.
Yeah, I think just kind of talking to that a little bit more, utilizing something like Crystal Reports, you can add in some shapes. So here it's saying that the item's actually below, so it can be helpful depending on what location that you're in. And with Crystal Reports, you also can pull in from different tables their information there. So the canned labels through MSCM just allow for 15 fields or something like that. So you may need some more detail there.
Can you go back one more?
Sure.
So there's actually other third-party options available for you, and some of them are relatively, and they're fully customizable. So you could download the different tables you want and create your own database within the program. And that's the one on the lower left, so you can fully customize it what you look like. And there's the fourth option you have is you could customize the ZPL, the Zebra printer language, to create more customized labels right from mobile supply chain. And that's the option, the bigger label that you see on the screen. All right, so with par counting, there are some common errors that you typically see. And most of them come up when you're first implementing mobile supply chain, the par counting. The most common one is the unit cost. So if you're adding new items, they're not on a PO25 agreement, or they just haven't been ordered or received yet, you'll get an error message on the upload saying there's an upload error, and that's what Stephanie was saying earlier. It'll create an unreleased requisition on RQ10. So it looks like that the count is submitted, but you'll actually have to implement a really good habit of checking this par counting report to make sure that all of your uploads are successful. Another common error is the requester ID error message. And what that typically means is the RQ04 record is not set up properly, or that the user is missing a requester identity on the security side. And one that's also somewhat common if you set your passwords to expire every so many days, and that's if the user, they update their password in Lawson and they don't log out of the Handheld, and before submitting accounts, you'll see a authentication failed on user, and that just means they have to log out of the Handheld and log back in with their new password. And this is that par counting report. It's under the par and cycle counting drop-down menu, and then you go to par counts and click on the reports. And then once you enter your criteria, you'll see the different error messages. You'll say upload error in the status message, and then it'll kind of give you a little bit of a clue as to what it is under the notes section. And then there's also some productivity reports that come out of the box with mobile supply chain. And for these to work, you need to have a Crystal Reports application server set up and defined in your MSCM.filter.properties file. And the productivity reports and operator activity reports, it's a good way to look into what your par techs are doing, how frequently they're counting pars, the number of units they're counting, and how long it takes them to count items. So it just gives you a little insight onto the efficiency of your team members.
All right. So really happy to report that there has been some new added functionality with par counting, and that's for Kanban. So this was just added in for the Q3 release. This is just built in MSCM. There's not any kind of data that writes to IC81. For organizations that are utilizing this process, they can build this in to MSCM. So it works on a bin-by-bin basis, and the quantity is equally divided based on the par level and number of bins. So something really cool to keep in mind for Q3. And here we have a little screenshot of what that actually looks like. And this is on the new Android platform,
yep,
which is also new. So pretty cool. It looks sharp.
Is that Q3 of 2017 or 2016?
I believe it was 2017. It was mentioned at the Winter Showcase this year.
So it's coming up.
It's coming up.
Okay,
correct.
Got it. Thanks.
All right. So some best practice recommendations. You want to start this one
Sure.
off?
So when you're starting your implementation, you want to define some roles and responsibilities of your users. Who's going to be doing what on the handhelds and in the mobile supply chain portal itself. And then once you have that defined, you want to set up various groups which ultimately allow that access and that functionality to be pushed out to the users. So whatever they can do on the handhelds, you want them to be able to do that on the portal, or do you want them to do it specifically on the handheld and no access to the portal? So you want to define who could do what and then build groups around that. You want to talk about the initial setup with IT, setting up that filtered properties file, making sure you're having your schedulers run on a timely basis and that they're all running smoothly. And then printer setup is always somewhat of a challenge. So you want to get that on your radar as soon as you start getting things going. Every organization is different, whether you're using printer servers or local printers. There's always some challenges around that, so that's always good to start testing that sooner rather than later, so you don't run into any hiccups around the time of go live.
And then really, we talked a lot about labels, making sure that you decide on a solution or multiple solutions. If you have LBI in use, we definitely recommend building a Crystal report. But My Label Designer can also be really helpful if you don't really have someone in-house that can support that. So you just build one list, but you want to allow some custom label. Yes,
I
question?
got a couple questions on the labels there.
Sure.
I guess in an earlier slide, it showed that you can print a label from a handheld, but I didn't hear you mention it.
Yeah, we must have missed that, huh?
Yes. So there is in the newer releases, there is an option to print a label from the handheld. I'm not sure if the screenshots show it.
Yeah, I don't think
It
so.
might. I don't want to misspeak on this one, but I believe once you update the par level, you might be able to push a new label out from that once you update the par level.
So is this going to go off of the user's default label printer?
Right.
If you go back to the reports, I got a couple questions. I'm catching
sure.
up here. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm
So in the
sorry.
reports, the question is, can these reports be generated from LBI?
The custom reports that I was
Yeah.
talking about earlier, yes, absolutely. And that's where you'd want to have them posted so you don't have individual users with a Crystal license number 1 or even able to modify that report themselves. So yes, we would recommend that they would be posted to LBI, and you certainly could report on those with something different, not necessarily Crystal if you have another reporting.
Okay. I got a couple more here. I'm going to hit. Is Kanban only available or anticipated to only be available with Android?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to misspeak on this, but I believe it's going to be an MSCM update. With that logic, it should be available for this
All the
year.
handhelds.
All handhelds, right?
And then, so we might not know, but I'm going to ask it. For the handheld label printing, do you know what version of MSCM is needed?
Good question. So we will look that up, and I think we must have the contact information right on there. So
Yes, we will definitely follow up.
Send out.
And the last one for now is, do you have instructions on how to set up a printer via the MSCM applications for tables? I don't know if that means anything.
Yeah, I'm not sure if
Yeah.
I'm following the question on that. I know to set it up in the application itself, the printers need to be set up on the MSCM server first, and then you need to add a host name and a printer name that matches how it's set up on the server.
All right, thanks. We'll take a break and let them ask some questions a little bit later. Thank you.
Great. So getting back to some of the best practices, we talked a lot about labels. There's lots of options. Yes, you can use all of them, but trying to have some sort of standard process so you don't have 20 different labels for all different departments at your organization. And then really making sure that you have MMIS data maintenance, you're watching over this data integrity, you're really relying on your customers and your supply chain department to keep all of this up to date. And it's a lot of information to try to sort through and understand the implications of that setup. So making sure that you have some audit reports in place to catch all this and point out the exceptions to the end user so it doesn't slow down their order moving forward. Leverage those ICO3 report groups. This is huge. This is something that would be maintained by the MMIS team. Again, something that users can create PARs on their own. They don't necessarily know what report groups it needs to be added to, so having some sort of communication process in place there. And then lastly, going back to those custom reports, build some PAR optimization reports. So grabbing usage from a bunch of different areas and really take the thinking out of it for your end users, make it simple for them whether they should up or decrease that PAR. Any questions? I like all the Caddyshack slides. One of my favorite movies.
So we have, do you have a template for PAR counts and updates needed for Crystal reporting?
Send us your email. I'll send you the reports that we showed today.
All right, cool. I think that might be it for questions so far. I want to thank everyone for attending, and Stephanie Kowal and Dan Farruggio for a great presentation.